Guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to try my hand at another tutorial. Today specifically we're going to be talking about color correction in DaVinci Resolve. This is the program I've been using mainly for all of my projects for about the last year and a half or so, and I really like it. So we're going to go over just the color correction process that I use personally. There's definitely more than one way of doing this, and regardless of what editing software you're using, the principles are going to remain the same when it comes to correcting your footage. This is not going to be color grading though, so color grading is kind of a separate thing than color correction. Color grading is more stylizing and manipulating colors to get a feel from the image that you want and a style to the image. The color correction is more of correcting problems. There is maybe some level of taste that goes into it, but for the most part, what we're trying to do is just correct the image, fix any issues with it, and bring it into an image that we can work with. So I am going to go over some things specific to DaVinci as well. So this video is really going to be geared towards those of you who are just getting into this. However, if you have been color grading for a while or color correcting your footage and working with DaVinci for a while, maybe you'll learn something new by watching how I do things. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I want to try to keep this video quick if I can. So we are here in the DaVinci Resolve color page. Here is the shot that we are using. And we just have the one shot on our timeline here because I'm just using it for demo purposes. So usually when you do your color correction, you're going to do it right here where all the nodes go. So if you're not familiar with DaVinci, this right here is a node. We don't use layers in this program, we use nodes, but the principle is kind of the same. So instead of stacking things on each other, your image in is right here, image out is right here, and we have one node, or I guess you could call it one layer on here. But as the image goes down the node tree, all of those things are getting stacked on top of it. So if we had more than one node here, this change is going to affect these two, but if I add something here, it's not going to affect these two, but it will get stacked on top and go to the output of the image. So we're able to affect the clip here, and we're also able to affect the entire timeline as well. Now, this said, there are a couple things in DaVinci when it comes to organizing your footage, but today we're gonna use a group when it comes to our footage, even though we've only got one clip, because that's generally what I use is a group, or what I use is remote grades. So that would be something like if you had one, let's say you had a video that was 10 minutes long and you had 3 different camera angles for that video and you're switching between each one. You should only have to grade 3 if you use remote grades. You should only have to grade 3 clips on that if they're all from the same footage. You shouldn't have to go and go to each individual clip that you cut up from the same shot. You should be able to just use remote grades, and then when you make a change to one, it will make the change to the rest of them as well. You don't always want to do that, but you might want to do that. So anyways, I used to just do this right here where I just made 3 nodes in line, and I basically did my exposure, my color balance, and then contrast here. I do things a little bit differently now, so we're going to get rid of that. We have these power windows up here, power grades, and I can add folders up here. I didn't even know I could add folders, but power grades, and you have your stills folder under the gallery here. So what this is if I wanted to keep a certain node tree, I can save one up here, and I've already got one saved, and I can use that within the same project. So I can pull this and drop it in here, and it's going to drop whatever node tree I have from within this project from the stills folder. However, if we use our power grades, I can take node trees I've used from other projects. So let's just take this one, for example, and drop it on here. That's a node tree I used for that, and it'll apply it to the image. So I want to delete all that. The reason I mention this is because right here, I have all my node trees that I typically use. So I've got them pre-made without any manipulation done to them, but they're already labeled, they're in the spots they need to be, and they're the kind of nodes they need to be. I don't want to go too much into nodes today, But I'm gonna go, first I'm gonna change this into a group. So like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times I am using groups. So I'm gonna just call this one slog. And we've made a new group now. And this group already exists in this project, I believe. Maybe not. But as you can see, I've now got 4 tabs up here instead of 2. So that's important because now I've got group pre-clip, the main clip tab that we already had before, group post-clip, and I've still got my timeline. So the cool thing is when I group clips together, I can now affect that entire group before and after the grades or the correction on the actual clip itself, which is pretty cool. So if there's a specific grade I want for a specific scene, I could use groups in order to accomplish that. So anyways, we are in groups. So the footage we are working with is from my Sony FX3. It is S-Log3, it's 10-bit footage. So the first thing I'm gonna need to do is I wanna convert this into a more usable kind of deliverable format. So ultimately it's gonna need to go to Rec 709. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a color space transform that I've already done, and I'm gonna drag and drop that on the group pre-clip. That is the effect color space transform. So if you haven't done this yet, just make a node and drop the color space transform effect on it. And this is what I changed up here. S-Log3, S Gamut 3 Cine, DaVinci Wide Gamut up there. So we've got that, and I'm going to DaVinci Wide and I turned off tone mapping. Other than that, I didn't touch anything else on this. So now this is gonna change our footage to DaVinci Wide Gamut for the timeline. However, it's not gonna get delivered like that. It is going to get, boom, right here. I'm gonna turn this one off right here. It is gonna get delivered in Rec 709. So in the timeline, I now have it going from DaVinci Wide Gamut to Rec 709. So this is a second color space transform and is the last thing I do, and that's at the end of the timeline there. And then right here is usually where I put my grade. I'm not gonna worry about that right now. We'll just, I'm just gonna reset that node for now, so it's just an empty node. But that's the color space transform. So now the image we see is gonna be in Rec 709. Even though what I am editing on my timeline is going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut. And the reason I do that is because it's going to give me a lot more colors to work with, a lot more flexibility in DaVinci Wide Gamut versus editing in a Rec 709 timeline. So when you're working with log, you need to convert the footage and change it. And you can do that this way. If you're using a different program, you can use LUTs in order to do this as well. And you may not need a LUT to go to Rec 709 in the end. You just put the LUT on it and that's it. So I do sometimes use that as well. So just kind of note that there. You don't have to do it this way. And then we're going to do my correction node tree that I've been using. So we're going to wait till that pops up there, and there it is. So as you can see, this looks a little bit more involved than it did previously. But essentially what we have here is my initial corrections, and I've added one on here. So I've got exposure, balance, saturation, and contrast. And there's a special thing I do to saturation. We're going to talk about that when we get to it. And then I've got these 4 parallel nodes just labeled second, and they're just second adjustments to anything above it. So contrast, and this is my little finesse to contrast if I need to make that. I'm going to mix all those together here, and then I go to these windows. And then I also have these outside nodes. And so windows is another term for masking. So down here, this is masking, but DaVinci calls it windows. So I have those, and then I have an outside node next to it. And what an outside node basically is any masking I do, it's gonna have the opposite selected on the outside node. So that's gonna be pretty cool to be able to use that in the end. And then I have another mixer here, and then just a miscellaneous node at the end. I did not come up with this node tree. This is something that I took from someone else, from a course I went through. So feel free to copy it. I don't take any credit for this. This is something that I was taught. So, and again, I just saved this in my power grades over here, and I just relabeled it nodes, and I just keep it here. So you just drag and drop. I don't have to build it every time, especially with the saturation. And when we talk about saturation, I will tell you all about the stuff with that. So The first thing we're going to do is go to exposure. So I'm going to look at my waveform and I'm just going to see what the waveform looks like here. See where our exposure is sitting at. I could probably bring down the shadows just a touch. The highlights look pretty good, maybe just a little high for me. There's a bunch of tools on here in DaVinci that people will use. Under their primaries, we could use offset to move the entire waveform there, and I can just take the entire image and pull it down. I could also use the curves, which for something like this, I'm going to use the curves. You can just pull the shadows down by adjusting your lift right here. As soon as it loads there, I could just pull down like that and adjust the shadows that way. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use my curves, and just the first selection right here on curves for your Luma curve. And I'm just going to grab that and pull it down slightly until I get to a spot where I like it. Right about there. The highlights can come down just a touch. Maybe there, maybe I'll pull these down from right here like that, just to kind of recover some of the sky that's outside the window there. Bring a little bit of that back. And then I'm a little too dark, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull the middle of my curve here up, and it's going to bring up those midtones until I at least think my skin is in a good spot. So this should be me right here. So what you can do also is you can put your cursor over the image and say, hey, this guy right here is what I'm looking at, and it'll show you that right here on the waveform. You saw those circles pop up. So that looks pretty good. I want to be around this 768 here on this, but really I take off that last number and I go from 0 to 100. So I see this as like 76 IRE. I want to be around 70, 75. So I'm right where I need to be there. So that looks good for exposure. If I had to do anything else to it, I would make that adjustment in the second here, but I think it looks pretty good. So the next one is balance. Now there's multiple ways to balance your image. There is an dropper right here you can use, and I can put this on the white on my shirt right here, which, yeah, it's pretty white. I'm wearing the same shirt right now, actually. Click on that, and that should adjust the balance. Now, usually that's gonna mess with the temp and tint on here in order to get that just right, and I think it looks pretty good. But if you don't wanna use that, what I normally do, if I don't have anything white in the image or gray to work with, I will pick that highlighted portion of my face, Shift H to hide everything else from it, and I'm gonna go to, as soon as the computer catches up, my vector scope here, and I'm just gonna see where I'm at, and I'm very undersaturated here. So I'm just gonna 2x on that. I'm gonna go back here to my offset, and I'm just gonna move this ever so slightly until I get my skin right on the flesh line indicator right there, the skin tone indicator right there. I wanna get it directly on it. So that looks pretty good. It's a little undersaturated, but it looks pretty good on there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hit Shift H again to get rid of the highlights there, and I'm going to get rid of the mask. And that's what the image looks like. So maybe a little bit warmer than what it did before, but my skin looks really good, I think, in this shot here. So those are a couple techniques that you can use. And then of course, a lot of people just go by what, their naked eye looking at this, and they could say, hey, this looks right, or this doesn't look right, or whatever. And just adjust it from there. Sometimes they can just like pull this back a little bit and be like, okay, yeah, that looks good there, or what have you. So I can also see my skin tone right here on the flesh line without keying it out, and actually right about there looks perfect. So those are a couple techniques when it comes to color balance. You can also use other tools like the parades, making sure all the parades look like they make sense for the image, like they're relatively even with each other, or again, they make sense. If it's a very blue image because of you're using RGB lights, the blue should be higher than other things on there. So anyways, let us get to the next part, saturation here. And actually we're gonna go back to the vector scope for this. Saturation. So saturation, I've done something different to this node. For this node specifically, I right click on it and I went to color space and I went to HSV, so that is checked off. I also went to channels and I unchecked channel 1 and channel 2. What that's gonna do is it's going to, in this node, limit me to only being able to manipulate saturation on this one. So instead of going here, which you would normally do, go to your primary wheels and crank up saturation. The thing is that usually ends up cranking up the brightness too, and that's not what I want to do. We want to use something called subtractive saturation. It is going to make the image more dense. A lot of people look for that, and actually DaVinci, the new version that I'm using right now, I think this is the beta still, yeah, Studio 19 beta down here. They have the color slice, and you can add the color density, the saturation and density on here. So that's pretty cool. They kind of have fixed this a little bit in DaVinci Resolve here, but I still use this as my primary means of adding saturation. So we're here, I've done all that to the node, and then all I've got to do is increase my saturation from here. And I can actually increase this across the whole image. I can pull it up from here, from the midtones mainly. If I don't want to touch the highlights too much, I can pull it up. I can pull it up from the shadows. So you can do all kinds of stuff. I can pull it out of the shadows here and put it into the midtones. Like I can do some interesting things here, but basically this is what I do. I will go here and I will just push this over until I get to a spot that I think looks pretty good, which is usually somewhere in this ballpark here. The red on my shirt is a little too bright. It's a little too saturated. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to go here and I'm going to kind of finesse that. I'm going to click on my second saturation node there. I'm going to go to hue versus saturation here, and we are going to isolate the red. So I'm going to push those where they need to be. And I'm going to pull down on the red, and if I pull down on the red, you see what it's doing to the red on my shirt. And I think it's just a little too much. We're going to pull that back and just a little bit. The thing is, it is going to potentially affect my skin tones a tiny bit too, because this is kind of in the same area. So we can kind of adjust where these 2 points are. If I'm like, the skin's kind of in there, I want to pull away from that, or it needs to be included more, we can kind of adjust that a little bit. I can kind of pull it all the way down and see like how much of it am I affecting here versus my skin. You can see my skin starting to look undersaturated. So we don't want to affect too much of the skin there. Let me see if I can finesse this a little bit more. All right, the other option is to go back to the color slice, and we can go to the reds and we can pull the reds down here. And as you can see, that is affecting more of just isolated color on my shirt here. So this is actually working a little bit better for us. So I'm just gonna pull it back just a tiny bit here, just so it's not popping so much in the image. All right. The next thing is the contrast. Pretty self-explanatory, but if you're unfamiliar, most people, what they'll do to add some contrast is they'll make an S-curve, so it looks something like bringing up the highlights and bringing down the shadows. You're trying to stretch the midtones and to divide them a little bit more into highlights and shadows, and that's going to create that contrast, bring your shadows down a little bit, bring up your highlights a little bit. This is usually the curve that most people will make. However, I tend to like my S-curve a little lower. So I'm going to go down all the way down here, and I'm going to pull down right here until I get these shadows kind of where I want them to be. And then I'm going to grab right about here. I'm going to pull this area up. And that looks pretty good to me. I'm actually going to go back to my waveform here just so I can see what it's doing to my skin and everything here. And right about there is where I want it. So I think that looks pretty good. So that's adding contrast to the image. You can also go to your primaries and just crank up contrast if you want to crank up contrast. That was obviously too much. Don't do that. But you can do that as well. You can also use the lift and gain here. You can go over here. You can use shadows and highlights or midtones and shadows or whatever, and you can pull them up and down with these sliders right here. But I like using the curves a lot, so that's what I usually do. So that's the initial correction on the image. The next thing is windows. So you can use windows to fix any kind of issues when it comes to the lighting or bring focus to a certain portion of the image. So for my first window here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix the actual window in this room. So we're gonna make a window, a mask essentially, and I'm just going to draw shape around here, basically outlining this window on the right side of the frame here. And we're gonna back out slightly just so I can kind of get everything I want to here. Shot, there we go. That looks pretty good. And essentially now what I've done is under the Windows node here, we have what is inside and what is outside. So if you can tell on here, this does not, the highlight portion shows that it's everything but the window. So if I make an adjustment here, it's gonna adjust the entire image except the window. Here, it will affect the window. And just to show you on here, I'm gonna go to my curves now and I'm gonna bring this way down. And as you can see, there's like this harsh line right here. You can tell exactly where that is. We can soften that up a bit. Let's go back here and just see. Not too bad. It's still a little harsh. I'll soften it up a bit more. And we don't want this to be as extreme. So I'm going to reset this and we are going to bring this down and I'm going to favor highlights, bring that down a little bit till it's in an area where I think is pretty good, which is somewhere in that ballpark. I like that. It's all right here around the 90 IRE is where it's kind of topping out at. So I think that actually looks pretty good for the image for what we got going on here. If I want to make an adjustment to the outside, everything else, I can go to the outside node and just bring everything else up. I don't want to make any adjustments here though. So for this one, what I'm going to do is I am going to basically make a vignette for myself. And I am going to kind of shape this and we'll zoom out. Oops, a little too much. We'll zoom out here and I will adjust this like that. I want to make it pretty soft. And essentially what this is going to do is bring the viewer's attention to me. So that looks pretty good. I'm gonna go here now. And this is everything, remember, on the inside. So as I do this, it is going to adjust everything on the inside. So I'm just going to basically keep me about where I'm at, maybe brighten up just a hair on there. And I'm also gonna bring down the shadows just a touch. Just add a tiny bit of contrast there. And then to everything else, I'm gonna bring it down. And we might have made our mask here a little too big. So let's bring it in smaller, right about there. Let's go back to here. And we can see what we're doing here. If you look on the sides there, I can bring them all the way down and it's kind of making this vignette effect, bringing your focus toward me. So reset this and we're just going to bring a little bit of those shadows. All right. So that's basically it. So we've done pretty much everything we've needed to do. We've fixed the exposure, we've balanced the image, added saturation, contrast, and then I did a little bit of masking just to bring some more attention to me and fix the exposure on the window. So that's pretty much it for color correction, you guys. The same principles will apply regardless of what program you're using. You kind of want to do the same things here. And that'll help you get on track so that you can add a good grade to all the footage. Because if anything is off here, you're gonna end up with larger mistakes when it comes to the grade. And if you get to the point where you're starting to grade and you realize there's a problem with an image, like, hey, it's actually not exposed right, I would recommend turning off the grade, going back to the image, going back to exposure. Sometimes I do that. I visit this and I say, hey, you know what? I don't like where my color balance is at here. So let's turn off a couple of these. I don't like where my balance is at right here. So I'm gonna go back here. I'm going to reset this and I'm just gonna use what it automatically did right there. And then we'll turn these back on. Maybe I wanna do that. Maybe I wanna use that balance instead of what I had before based off my skin. So yeah, that's basically it, you guys. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know. If you guys like this kind of thing and want more tutorials or little tips and tricks or how-tos on using DaVinci or Final Cut or anything, I use mainly DaVinci and Final Cut, not Premiere, so I can't really teach anything on that. But if you guys have any more questions on that, please let me know. I really hope this was helpful for you guys, or at least entertaining, and maybe you guys got something out of this. So if you guys do things differently and you think I could do things better, let me know that too. I'm always looking to improve on this. So hopefully this was helpful, you guys. Thank you for watching. Take care and God bless.